After the insane amount of value that we got from the Fei Shao and triple rerun banners in the first half of version 2.5, it might seem crazy to think that the second half would also have some really valuable characters. But the second half banners are going to feature the release of Lingsha, who is going to be a new sustain character, and Topaz's second rerun banner, and she is one of the best aging characters throughout the lifespan of Star Rail. So today we're going to go over Lingsha and Topaz's kits to see if you should pull for either of them on your account, or if you should skip them in favor of another character that might be coming out either in the future or is still out right now. So let's start with Lingsha, who's going to be our newest Fire Abundance character. Starting with her basic attack, Lingsha just damages one enemy, which, by itself it doesn't really have too much value, but because of the way her skill works, which we will get to, you will probably see yourself using this basic attack every now and then. Then for her talent, it's going to allow her to summon Fu Yuan whenever her skill is used, and Fu Yuan works pretty similarly to Numbi for Topaz. So Fu Yuan initially has 3 actions and can have up to 5, and has an initial speed of 90. Fu Yuan's actions are follow-up attacks that damage all enemies, as well as dealing extra damage to a single enemy. But rather than that single enemy being random, it will actually focus and prioritize enemies that are not weakness broken and also have the fire weakness. At the same time, each Fu Yuan attack will heal and cleanse a debuff from all allies, making it a pretty nice burst heal. Next, Lingsha's skill increases Fu Yuan's action count by 3, does a blast attack, and heals all allies based on Lingsha's attack. Lingsha's ultimate inflicts Befog on all enemies for 2 turns, which increases the break damage they receive. In addition, the ultimate also damages all enemies, heals all allies, and advances Fu Yuan to the front of the action order. Lingsha's technique allows you to summon Fu Yuan at the start of the next battle, and inflicts Befog on all enemies for 2 turns, which helps her maintain Fu Yuan and Befog's uptime as much as possible. Now let's look at her traces. Her first Ascension trace gives her extra attack and outgoing healing based on her break effect, which is a nice way to get some extra healing since Lingsha's healing scales off of her attack as well. Her second Ascension trace gives her 10 extra energy when using her basic attack. This is really good because you only need to use her skill when Fu Yuan is about to hit 0 actions or if you need a quick heal. So this allows Lingsha to be played more SP positive. The last Ascension trace allows Fu Yuan to automatically attack without using an action count once every 2 turns when an ally is at or below 60% HP. This is a nice emergency heal as well as giving some extra damage, which I think is going to be very helpful for her. Lastly, her stat traces give her 37.3% break effect, 18% HP, and 10% attack, which are helpful for her healing and her damage. So now that we've gone over Lingsha's kit, let's move on to whether or not you should pull for her. Lingsha is going to have a ton of value for players that need a limited 5-star sustain for their accounts, and she can work well on pretty much any team. But it's undeniable that the team that people are going to be looking at the most for her, and I think that she probably will perform the best on, is going to be the Firefly Break team. But that team already has an impressive sustain character in Gallagher, and Gallagher has been out for a few versions now. If you've already invested in Gallagher like I have and have him at E6, I don't feel like Lingsha is very necessary for you to pull just to put on that team. Now, is she going to perform better than Gallagher? I mean, absolutely, once you have good investment, and if you also chase Eidolons, absolutely. But if we're talking from a free-to-play perspective, and we're comparing an E0 Lingsha to an E6 Gallagher, the difference isn't insane enough to where you should be rushing to drop Gallagher, pull for Lingsha, and use her instead. And most likely from her kit alone, I do think that she's not really game-breaking, so Gallagher will still be very competitive with the release of Lingsha, even though they both are Abundance Fire characters. But if you're struggling when it comes to limited 5-star sustains, regardless of what team you're running, like if you don't have characters like Aventurine, Huo, Fu Xuan, the top tier sustains like that, Lingsha is going to be an amazing character to pull for because she's just able to work very well on any team. And regardless of which limited sustain you go for, with the exception of, Locha can still perform well, but he is not as good as some of the newer sustains we've gotten. But even with him, they will all significantly help you in comparison to the non-limited sustains, with the exception of Gallagher, because Gallagher is just different. So Overall for Lingsha, she is an amazing character to pull for if you're lacking sustains, but if you already are solid on sustain, she's not really necessary to pull, as she's not like super game breaking or, you know, life changing kind of character. So now let's talk about Topaz. Topaz is a fire hunt character that specializes in not only performing follow-up attacks, but also in increasing the follow-up damage taken by enemies. Starting with Topaz's basic attack, it just deals damage to a single enemy. But pairing this with one of her ascension traces that makes it a follow-up attack, you can opt to play Topaz as a more SP efficient character. Next, Topaz's talent has her summon Numby at the start of battle. Numby has a base speed of 80, and does a follow-up attack against the enemy target inflicted with the Proof of Debt state, which we'll go over more when we get to Topaz's skill. Also, whenever the enemy with Proof of Debt is attacked by any follow-up attack besides Numby's, Numby will be advanced forward by 50%, meaning that Numby will act much more often on a follow-up attack team comp. Next, Topaz's skill has Numby attack an enemy with a follow-up attack, while also inflicting Proof of Debt on them, which makes that enemy take 50% more damage from follow-up attacks. Rather than having a turn duration, Proof of Debt is active until the enemy is defeated, or until Topaz uses her skill to apply it to a different enemy, so it's best to focus on one enemy at a time. If Proof of Debt is not inflicted on any enemies once any ally takes action, one random enemy will be inflicted with it. Next, Topaz's ultimate acts as a temporary buff for Numby. Upon using her ultimate, Numby enters the Windfall Bonanza state, which significantly increases its follow-up attack damage multiplier, gives it an extra 25% crit damage, and is overall just a very solid buff that she gets for 2 turns. And this also allows Numby's action to advance by 50% whenever the enemy with Proof of Debt is hit with any attack, not just a follow-up. Now, Topaz's technique is amazing for overworld exploration, as it allows her to summon Numby to lead you right to any chests that are within a certain area around you. And not only that, if you use her technique before battle, it'll also give Topaz 60 energy after Numby's first attack. And upon beating any overworld enemies, Topaz will also get a certain amount of bonus credits up to a set amount limit per day, which is also really good for that overworld exploration. Finally, let's go over Topaz's traces here. I mentioned her first ascension trace already, which considers her basic attack to be a follow-up attack, which will make Topaz more skill point efficient while still advancing Numby's action. Topaz's second ascension trace gives Topaz and Numby a 15% damage increase against enemies with a fire weakness, which can be some nice extra damage. Then her last ascension trace gives Topaz 10 extra energy whenever Numby attacks in the Windfall Bonanza state, which could help to get ults a bit faster. Lastly, Topaz's stat traces give her 22.4% fire damage, 12% crit rate, and 10% HP, which is definitely going to help out with her damage and consistency. So now that we've gone over her kit, let's talk about her pull value. Topaz is in a very interesting spot when it comes to her value, because even though we now have some other more accessible alternatives for her role as a follow-up either DPS or sub-DPS, I don't feel like her pull value has really gone down at all. So yeah, Topaz within this role of being like a DPS character, or depending on your team, sub-DPS for follow-up comps, her Proof of Debt makes her extremely invaluable on any follow-up team. And I kind of view her state in the meta for follow-up teams to be very similar to how Kafka feels for dot teams. Although for Kafka, it does feel a little bit more like necessary to use her because no one else does what Kafka does. But for pretty much until 2.4 when Hunt March came out, Topaz was really the main character, the main DPS style character that also can increase follow-up damage on the enemy as well. But I also would argue that because of the state of these teams, comparing follow-up and dot, I do think Topaz is actually aging better than Kafka, just because of how many buffs that follow-up has gotten. So I do think that if you're looking for a character that is going to last you for a long time, and has lasted for a long time, Topaz is an amazing character to build, because I think she is going to be extremely relevant, considering how many new follow-up characters we've gotten. And I feel like of the main archetypes, like follow-up, break, dot, I feel like follow-up is the easiest one for them to make a bunch of different characters for, and we've clearly seen that already, especially with us getting some very strong follow-up characters very recently. So like I mentioned before, we do have 2 new follow-up characters that could work well in this similar kind of role of Topaz, who can do very solid damage and also just generally be a bit of extra support for follow-up characters. And for that, I'm talking about the new Hunt March 7th, which we can E6 for free, and a Mose, who just came out on Fei Xiao's banner. So even if you do have both of them very invested in, like you have them at E6, and they're very good, I do still think Topaz can be valuable. She may not feel as necessary because Hunt March 7th and Mose can support your follow-up comps, but Topaz, if you do have enough investment in her, she is going to outperform them. She is the premium kind of option, and yeah, she's overall just going to perform very well. So if you do really want to hone in on getting just using follow-up, and even if you have March and Mose, there might be situations where there's a lot of fire weakness and you want to prioritize Topaz over maybe March or Mose, then that can be a situation where she'll work better in. But because of how many follow-up characters we have, I can definitely see if someone just fully builds for follow-up, they can build two very strong teams. And especially if you have Fei Xiao, you pulled Robin, Topaz is going to be an amazing character for you to pull on at the end of the day. So now let's answer the big question here. Should you pull for Lingsha, Topaz, or are you fine to just skip them? Now, as I said, I think they both do have a lot of value. So if you can only get one of them, I think it comes down to what you think is going to benefit your account the most. If you're really focusing in on building a bunch of follow-up comps, then I think Topaz will probably be your best option to take your teams to the next level. Because if you're in a situation where you're doing a lot of follow-up, plus you also don't have many great sustains, you probably are better off pulling for Topaz now and then waiting on a possible Aventurine rerun banner, because he is the best sustain for follow-up. But if you're struggling with sustained characters, whether it is for the Firefly break team if you don't have Gallagher well invested, or if you generally just don't have many sustains in your account and you want to make some more progression while not also super focusing on the follow-up teams, then I think Lingsha is going to be an amazing character for you to pull. Her healing is great, and you are going to be able to slot her in pretty much anywhere. But I feel like if you don't have either of those needs, whether it be if your sustains are all good, or if you're not really, doing follow-up like that, then I think that skipping them is also completely fine. At least in my situation, it is a little bittersweet for me because I don't have the currency to pull for Topaz, and I think Topaz is a really good character. But I also do want to wait for a time where I can pull her and get her, with a bit more investment, like getting her signature light cone would also be massive for my account. But I do think that if you are fine where you are, and either your follow-up teams are solid with March and Mose, or if your sustains are good, you don't feel like these two are going to make that much of an impact, I think skipping them could be fine, because not only do we, not know what we're going to be getting in terms, I know we're getting Rappa in a few weeks for 2.6, but then we'll also have to see what we get for 2.7. Plus, considering the schedule for reruns, we could have some very strong characters coming back, like Acheron, Aventurine, those very powerful characters could end up having reruns. We don't know for sure yet, but we'll have to see. And I think that for some of those characters, saving your Jades for them if you don't have them, or if you want to further invest by pulling signature light cones or an extra Eidolon, that'll also be really good as well. So that's gonna be it for my thoughts on Lingsha and Topaz. Let me know in the comments who you're going to be pulling for. Thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But with that, I will see you all next time.